Welcome to the EPA Endpoint Assessment session on the interview part of the EPA. So that is your professional discussion around your portfolio. So in today's session, I'm going to go through the criteria for the interview, and I'd like you, hopefully by the end of the session, to know how to meet at least the pass criteria for the EPA interview with the portfolio evidence. So in your apprenticeship support pack on pages 12 to 13, you should have the criteria for this part of the EPA, and what you'll see is which different knowledge, skills and behaviours are assessed for this component. So you can see in this column that tells you what KSBs will be assessed in this component. This tells you what you need to do to meet the pass criteria. And for some of the KSBs, but not all, there is distinction criteria. I'm not going to go into the distinction criteria in this session. There'll be a separate session for that. So we're going to start with K4 and K9. Essentially, for this criteria, you need to be able to describe why coaching, contracting and recontracting is important and which models enable the effectiveness of this, and how evaluation is important in demonstrating return on investment and delivery of values. So there's two separate components here. There's K4 here and then there's K9 here. So let's start with K4. This is where you need to go back to your first assignment for Masterclass 1 because you addressed all of this criteria there. So go back to Masterclass 1 assignment, find your coaching rationale, find your coaching contract, and I would put your answer into bullet points. So you really need to be able to explain here why contracting is important. Remember the principles of contracting: openness, transparency, and that's transparency not just for the coachee but for senior stakeholders. And the fundamentals of a good coaching contract. So the importance of logistics, timing, scheduling, making sure the coachee is clear on what coaching is and isn't. And also to be able to explain what recontracting is. Remember, recontracting can happen within the coaching process or program, but it also might happen maybe in the middle, or it might happen even after the initial contracting. You do your first session and it feels like it's gone in a different direction to what you agreed. So you need to be able to give an example of when you've recontracted here. So come up with an example, but also explain why recontracting is important. Essentially, if it's not in line with the organisational goals, then something needs to happen, doesn't it, as a coach in order to bring the sessions in line with the organisational goals. And also, recontracting is important because if your coachee is going in this direction and you're going in that direction, there's a discrepancy, isn't there, in what you're working towards as a coach and coachee. In terms of models, we need to talk about written models, verbal models. We need to be able to talk about perhaps models like Clear or Fuel, that's signpost contracting that you might have used. Maybe even Jenny Rogers' suggestion about involving the stakeholder in the contracting meetings. So if you want to demonstrate a pass, you need to be able to describe why coaching, contracting and recontracting is important and how you've implemented that. So you need to give some examples. The second component here is K9, so that is demonstrating return on investment and delivery of value. So the key word here is, why is that important? So you need to look here at your Masterclass 7 resources on impactful coaching. So go to the slides for Masterclass 7 and revise what we did in that masterclass around why is it important to show return on investment. There's a slide with some brainstorm ideas on that. The key things here are to keep senior stakeholders informed, on how you're using time and resources, that's why it's important. They'll want to know if you're using the time, the resources, the money, actually what is their return as an organisation. Also, remember we talked about being ambassadors for coaching, and how can you carry on a coaching program if no one's bought in. So one way to get investor and stakeholder buy-in is to showcase value, and then hopefully they'll want to roll that out on a wider level. So revisit the criteria from Masterclass 7 slides and make sure that you're comfortable explaining why it's important to demonstrate ROI and delivery of value. S1. So this one is, I feel, quite straightforward if you break it down. You need to explain how you schedule coaching. So what we need here is an example of your scheduling process. What does it look like? Is it email? Do you have a timetable that you can refer to? What's the evidence you've put in your portfolio for this one? Your record sheet. Do you pre-plan dates in the contracting stage? Explain your coaching scheduling process. But also, we want to know here, it's a very demanding role as a coach. So how do you mentally prepare for it? Have some examples of techniques you use to demonstrate that, blocking off 15 minutes before a session, grounding yourself, getting yourself a coffee, whatever works for you. And also, how do you maintain records? So we need an example of your record keeping here as well. And there needs to be a narrative around, or a rationale around why you keep your records that way. What information do you keep on your records? And why have you kept that information? How does it help you plan and inform your future sessions? And how does it help you to reduce conflicts with other activities? So you're all busy people, you're all busy leaders. How are you managing that? Is that by perhaps pre-planning your sessions in the contracting stage and not doing it spontaneously? And give an example of maybe when there has been a reschedule or a clash and how you've managed that. So that was quite straightforward, hopefully. S4, S5 and B3. So this is about how do you work and contract with stakeholders? So it's a bit of an extension of what we've already talked about, to agree outcomes and acting as an ambassador for the role, maintaining confidentiality and boundaries. So this one is more about how you contract with the wider organisation. So you need to plan an answer around conversations you've had with senior stakeholders. If it's evident you're operating in isolation of your organisational goals and your leaders, that's not good practice as an organisational coach. You need to be able to explain here the wider goals the wider conversations you've had with senior stakeholders and how those have fed into your program and how you've rolled it out. But remember, as a coach, you have to be able to create trust. You have to be able to create psychological safety. So how have you done that? Brought on senior stakeholders whilst maintaining confidentiality and boundaries as a coach. How do people know you're the coach in the organisation and that you're practicing coaching values, i.e. you're not going telling someone about the conversation you've had, you can be trustworthy. Is there anything on social media that you've used to promote yourself as an internal coach, to show that you are an ambassador for coaching and people hopefully will trust you? Is there anything internally through comms that you've shared that shows that you're an ambassador for coaching, so that you can, whilst involving senior stakeholders, still uphold the trust of your coachee? So plan a clear explanation there as to how you've contracted with stakeholders, including the coachee and the managers, the leaders, the senior stakeholders. Again, refer to Masterclass 1, assignment and resources and slides, because that is where the information is to prepare for that answer. S13 and B2. So this is about energy shifts. So this criteria involves you describing energy shifts in a coaching session. So you should have here an example in your portfolio that you're really familiar with. And you can say, in the evidence that I've provided, there's a transcript, and you can see here that the energy started as X and then moved to Y. And I knew this because the coachee said this. So give an example. And then I could tell it had shifted because the coachee had said this. So you need to be able to describe the energy shift, giving an example. So don't just say it moved from quite slow and frustrated to uplifted and gaining pace. The coachee gained pace. I want you to give an example from the transcript that you put in. Use the language the coachees used, or describe the shift in body language that you saw. Be as specific as you can. Specific here. But you also need to be able to say, well, how have you improved your self-awareness to be able to identify shifts? So we really want some reference here to your own work on self-awareness. You might want to refer to the Johari window and how that's made you more aware of your blind spots as a leader, increasing your sensitivity to how others perceive you and how you perceive others. It might be your reflective journal that you refer to here that's helped you become more self-aware. As you reflect, you hopefully will listen back to your coaching sessions, and that will make you more aware of perhaps things you've missed that you could have picked up on, or even any assessment, whether that's self-assessment or observed practice from me. So from you or your assessor, how has that made you more aware, self-aware? So what you need to be able to do here is describe the energy shift with examples, but also elaborate on how are you more self-aware, what tools have you used to be able to make you perceive things in a more sensitive way, and also perceive yourself in a more accurate manner. S14. So S14 is about explaining how diversity and inclusion informs your practice by providing a considered justification for valuing the inherent diversity between you and your coachee. So here, you need to be able to give an example of how you make your practice diverse and inclusive. So refer to the evidence here. There's so many different ways you can do this, and your evidence will hopefully exemplify how you have done that. And you need to be able to explain here that you have unconscious bias and you're aware that this is a phenomenon, a concept that coaches need to be aware of. There are blind spots, and you use feedback mechanisms to help identify them. Coachees give you feedback, stakeholders give you feedback, Johari Windows giving you feedback, and however you use that data to make your practice more diverse and inclusive. So it might be you've put something in the contracting stage, like a survey or a screening part where you gather information on preferred pronouns, gather information on learning styles or what makes the coachee feel at ease. You might even just verbally ask at each session what's working for you, what's not, to make sure that you're gathering data on how to make your practice more inclusive. There's lots of different ways you can do this, but as long as you can explain, you can give a specific example of how you've made your practice more diverse and inclusive, and you can explain how there is differences between you and your coachee and how some of those might influence your practice negatively and positively. You might think about things like the halo effect, how you might favour certain types of coachees, and you're using your reflective journal to identify that. Essentially, for information on this, you need to refer to Masterclass 6. So the slides on that masterclass and the assignment that you completed, that's where you go for this question. And B1. So B1 is about explaining with examples how you perform reflection and research to determine the effectiveness of your own practice, producing personal development plans to maintain ongoing development in your role. So this is where I think we can be quite methodical. I would approach it like this. You refer to your reflective journal and you find something in your reflective journal that has flagged an area for development. So, for example, in my reflective journal, you can see that a big area for me was reducing the amount of compound questions to support the coachee with clarity in their thinking. And you can see this in my reflective journal. So find an example in your reflective journal of an area for development. An area for development. So that's the first step. When you've done that, you then need to link it to your personal development plan. So once I identified this as an area for development, I fed it into my personal development plan. As you can see from my personal development plan, there's an activity around reducing compound questions. And you can see that to do that, I listened to other coaches on coaching demos on YouTube. I reflected back on some of my own coaching sessions and came up with some alternative questions that were compounded initially. And as a result, you can see the impact of my coaching improved because my assessors pointed out that I've used less compound questions in my self-assessment, in their assessment of me. Or you might just want to say, I noticed in this recording there was significantly less compound questions than before, and the coachee was able to speak and was able to communicate better, was able to say more because they understood what I was asking them more clearly. So this is the method for this answer. Identify something in your reflective journal that you've identified as an area for development. Explain how you fed that into your PD plan, and then explain how that's had an impact on your coaching. That would be a good way of tackling that question. being as specific as you can and linking those activities together.